That night, I sat in the dimly lit living room, holding a glass of whiskey that had gone untouched for over an hour. The words I overheard from my kids earlier replayed in my mind, each repetition like a fresh wound to my heart. "Who do you want to stay with after the divorce?" my daughter whispered. Her brother's response was casual, almost cheerful. "Of course, I want to stay with Mom and her boyfriend. He lets me drive his new car and promised to buy me one too. By the way, Mom said he might actually be our real dad because she dated him 15 years ago. I really hope that's true." I froze when I first heard it, standing outside my son's room with a laundry basket in hand. I waited, hoping it was just a misunderstanding, some twisted joke between siblings. But the silence that followed confirmed it wasn't. That night, I couldn't sleep. Memories of my wife, the woman I'd spent 16 years building a life with, flashed before me. Every shared glance, every whispered promise, now felt like a cruel lie. I stared at the ceiling, wondering how long she'd been unfaithful. Was it just this man, or were there others? And, most terrifyingly, was my son really mine? By 4 a.m., I had my suitcase packed. I knew I couldn't face her, not yet. I left a short note on the kitchen counter. "Need time to think. Don't call me." I didn't even care if she saw it or not. I needed to get out before my anger consumed me. The next day, I stayed in a motel, trying to process everything. My phone buzzed nonstop with calls and texts from her, and eventually from my daughter. I ignored them until I saw one message from my girl that read, "Please, Dad, answer. It's serious." I hesitated, then called her back. Her voice trembled when she answered. "Dad, I think something's wrong with Mom," she cried. "What's going on?" I demanded, already grabbing my keys. "I don't know how to explain it," she sobbed. "She's locked in her room, and I heard her screaming. She won't open the door. She's acting strange, like she's scared of something." Terrified of what I might find, I rushed home. I didn't know what awaited me, but I had a sinking feeling that whatever my daughter had witnessed was just the beginning of uncovering the truth. When I pulled into the driveway, my stomach twisted in knots. The house stood dark and quiet, except for the faint glow in the upstairs bedroom. My daughter's face appeared in the window, pale and frantic. She disappeared when she saw me, probably running to open the door. The moment I stepped inside, she was there, clinging to me like a lifeline. "Dad, she's not answering," she said. "She's just screaming sometimes, and then it goes quiet." I told her to sit in the living room while I dealt with her mother. My fists clenched as I climbed the stairs, each step heavier with anger and dread. I pounded on the bedroom door. "Jessica, open the door. What's going on?" No answer, just muffled sobs. I didn't wait. I slammed my shoulder against the door until it burst open. What I saw froze me in my tracks. Jessica was huddled in the corner, clutching her knees, her face streaked with tears. Papers were scattered all over the floor, and her laptop was smashed on the dresser. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear. "You weren't supposed to know," she whispered, barely audible. "I thought I could fix it before you found out." "Fix what?" I snapped, stepping into the room. My eyes scanned the mess, landing on a set of photos scattered on the floor. Photos of her and another man. They weren't just casual snapshots. They were intimate, graphic. My blood boiled. "Is this him?" I growled, grabbing one of the pictures and shoving it in her face. She didn't answer, only sob harder. My gaze fell to a paper clutched in her hand. I snatched it before she could react. It was a paternity test. My name wasn't listed. It wasn't even my son's name. The results showed a match between her affair partner and both my kids. Rage overtook me. "Are you telling me those kids aren't mine?" I roared. She flinched, shrinking further into the corner. "I didn't know for sure," she screamed. "I thought they were yours until he came back into my life. He wanted to be involved, and he made me do the test. I didn't mean for it to go this far, The words blurred as my vision turned red. I turned and stormed out of the room, nearly ripping the banister off the stairs as I descended. My daughter ran to me, panic in her eyes. "Dad, what's happening? What's wrong with Mom?" she pleaded. I couldn't answer her. I just grabbed my phone and called the man she'd been seeing. His number was right there in the text I had ignored, his smug promises about taking care of everything. When he picked up, his voice was smooth, confident. "Hey, Jess," he said. "This isn't Jessica," I interrupted. "This is her husband, and I'm coming to see you." He started to say something, but I hung up. I didn't have time for his excuses. I grabbed my car keys. But before I could leave, Jessica came stumbling down the stairs, screaming after me. "Don't go. Don't make this worse," she begged. I turned on her, my voice cold as ice. "Worse? You've already destroyed everything. You're lucky I don't drag you into court right now and bury you in lawsuits for what you've done." She crumpled on the stairs as I slammed the door behind me. The drive to his place was a blur of fury. When I got there, I found him lounging in his driveway, leaning against a shiny sports car with a cigarette in hand, as if he'd been waiting for me. "You must be the husband," he said smugly, blowing out a puff of smoke. That smirk was the last straw. Without saying a word, I charged at him, grabbing his collar and slamming him against the car. "You think you can just waltz into my life, ruin my family, and walk away?" He laughed, pushing back and shoving me off. "They're my kids, man. You've been babysitting them for years." I just took back what's mine. His words stoked the fire inside me. The next thing I knew, my fist connected with his jaw. He staggered, clutching his face, but then swung back, landing a punch to my ribs. We went at it like animals, fists flying, both of us fueled by rage and pride. Neighbors started coming outside, some shouting for us to stop, others just watching the spectacle. I didn't care. All I cared about was making him pay for everything. My shattered marriage, my stolen fatherhood, the betrayal. It wasn't until the police sirens wailed in the distance that I stepped back, my chest heaving. His face was bloodied, but I wasn't much better off. "This isn't over," I spat, glaring at him as the cops pulled up. "You're going to regret every second of this." As they cuffed me and put me in the back of the squad car, I didn't feel defeated. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of satisfaction. The fight wasn't over, but I'd made my first move. The drive to the station felt like an eternity. My wrists ached from the cuffs, but I wasn't focused on the pain. No, my mind was locked onto one goal. Ending them both. This wasn't about reconciliation, forgiveness, or even custody. This was about obliterating everything they had built at my expense. At the station, the officers were surprisingly lenient. A neighbor had vouched for me, explaining I was the wronged husband confronting the other man. They kept me in a holding cell for a few hours, gave me a lecture, and released me with a stern warning. As I walked out into the night, bruised and battered but free, my mind churned with plans. They thought they could humiliate me, steal years of my life, and walk away unscathed. Not a chance. The next morning, I put my plan into motion. First, I visited an old buddy of mine, Alan, a private investigator I'd helped out with side jobs years ago. Alan had deep connections and owed me a favor. "I need dirt," I said flatly, laying out the situation. Alan whistled low, shaking his head. "Man, you've got a real mess on your hands. You sure about this?" "What kind of dirt are we talking?" "Everything. I want his financials, his business dealings, anything shady I can use to ruin him. And I want Jessica's, too. I don't care what it costs." He nodded grimly. "Give me a week." While Alan worked, I focused on my next target, Jessica's reputation. She had always been meticulous about maintaining her image as the perfect mom, the devoted wife. The PDA meetings, neighborhood fundraisers, the carefully curated Facebook posts. All of it was about projecting a spotless facade. I knew exactly how to destroy it. First, I gathered the evidence I already had. the photos, the texts, the paternity test. Then, I created a folder labeled Jessica's Lies and filled it with every damning piece of proof. Finally, I drafted an email to everyone in her social circle, her friends, her colleagues, the PTA moms, even her parents. The subject line read, "The truth about Jessica, last name." I hesitated for a moment, my finger hovering over the send button. This would burn every bridge and erase any chance of reconciliation. But then I remembered my son's words. I really hope he's our real dad. I hit send. By noon, my phone was blowing up with messages. Some were from mutual friends, shocked and horrified. Others were from Jessica, begging me to stop. I ignored them all. The real fireworks came later that evening, when Jessica stormed into the house, her face pale and tear-streaked. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she screamed. "You've destroyed my life. Everyone, my boss, my friends, everyone knows." I looked at her without flinching. "Good. Now you know how it feels." She sank onto the couch, sobbing. "Please stop this. We can fix it. We can figure something out." I laughed bitterly. "Fix it? You slept with him for years. You let me think those kids were mine. You think this is something a couple of therapy sessions will fix." Her sobs grew louder, but I felt nothing. No pity. No remorse. "Get out of my house," I said coldly. "Pack your things and leave." "But where will I go?" she asked, desperation in her voice. "To him," I spat. "He's your real family now." Meanwhile, Alan delivered on his promise. The man Jessica had been seeing wasn't just an arrogant sleazebag. He was a criminal. He had a history of shady business deals, unpaid taxes, and even a few harassment allegations from women he'd worked with. With Alan's help, I compiled everything into a detailed report and sent it to two places: his employer and the IRS. Within days, his life began to unravel. His boss fired him. His accounts were frozen. This version is a bit more streamlined and clear, with the same intensity, but improved readability. Let me know if you need any further changes. The boyfriend's assets were frozen, and he was under investigation for tax evasion. The last time I saw him, he was hauling boxes into his car, his fancy house up for sale. But I wasn't done yet. The final piece of my revenge involved the kids. As much as it hurt to know they weren't biologically mine, I still loved them. But I couldn't let Jessica walk away with full custody. Using the paternity results from her affair as leverage, I filed for divorce, pushing for a brutal custody arrangement. I demanded primary custody, citing her infidelity and unstable behavior. The court battle was ugly, but the evidence was on my side. In the end, I got what I wanted: custody of the kids and the house. Jessica was left with nothing but her shame and a string of bad decisions. Months later, I sat in my quiet living room, a glass of whiskey in hand. The kids were asleep upstairs, oblivious to the storm that had passed. My life was far from perfect, but it was mine again. As for Jessica and her boyfriend, they were both out of the picture, their lives in ruins. And me? I was finally free. The dust had settled, but the silence that followed felt almost unnatural, like the eerie calm after a hurricane. Life wasn't perfect, far from it, but I was learning to live with the new normal. The kids were adjusting, though I could see the questions in their eyes. They didn't fully understand why their mother wasn't around as much anymore, why everything had changed so drastically. One evening, as I was helping my daughter with her homework, my phone buzzed. It was Alan. "You're not going to believe this," he said, his voice sharp with excitement. "What now?" I asked, already bracing for more bad news. "Your ex and her boyfriend are trying to sue you, claiming defamation for the email blast and ruining their lives." I couldn't help but laugh. "You're joking." "Nope, but don't worry. I've got something better. I found a lead on your wife's lover. Let's just say it's the nuke you've been waiting for. Meet me tomorrow." The next morning, I met Alan at a dingy diner just outside town. He slid a manila envelope across the table, his grin widening as I opened it. Inside were pages of documents, grainy photographs, and a flash drive. "What am I looking at?" I asked. "Your wife's boyfriend, mister, I'm your kid's real dad, has been very busy. Turns out he wasn't just cheating with your wife. He's been running around with at least 3 other women. And get this, they all thought they were exclusive. One of them even got pregnant." I stared at the documents, stunned. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious," Alan replied. "But wait, there's more. One of these women is married to a city councilman. If this gets out, it'll make your little revenge campaign look like child's play." For the first time in months, I felt a twisted sense of glee. "So, what's the play?" I asked. Alan smirked. "We expose him, of course. But we do it smart. Leak it to the right people. Let the dominoes fall." It didn't take long to set the plan in motion. Using an anonymous email, I sent the evidence to the councilman, the other women involved, and a few carefully chosen media outlets. The story hit like a bomb. By the end of the week, the boyfriend's name was plastered across every local news site. Headlines screamed about his affairs, the illegitimate child, and his shady dealings. His reputation was in tatters, and his social media accounts were bombarded with insults and threats. That same night, Jessica called me in a panic. "What did you do?" she demanded, her voice shrill. "I did what I should have done months ago," I said calmly. "I made sure the world sees him for what he is, a lying, cheating parasite." "Sound familiar?" "This is going to ruin him," she screamed. "Good," I said, hanging up. The fallout was immense. Jessica's boyfriend lost what little credibility he had left. The councilman's wife filed for divorce, taking him to court not just for infidelity, but for fraud. It turned out the boyfriend had been extorting her for money to keep their affair quiet. Jessica, meanwhile, was spiraling. She called me repeatedly, begging for a truce, but I ignored her. She even showed up at the house once, crying on the porch, but I refused to let her in. "You made your bed," I said coldly. "Now lie in it." I told her through the door. Now lie in it. By the time the dust had settled, I'd not only won custody, but also secured a hefty settlement in the divorce. Jessica had no choice but to move out of state and start over. Her boyfriend, now broke and disgraced, vanished from the scene entirely. As for me, life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again. I focused on the kids, rebuilding the trust and stability they needed. And for the first time in a long time, I could breathe. I'd been through hell, but I'd come out the other side stronger, smarter. And the best part? They'd never see me coming if they ever tried to come back. Months turned into a year, and life slowly began to fall into place. The house felt quieter without Jessica, but it was a peaceful quiet. The kids and I had built a new rhythm together. Weeknight dinners, movie nights, and the occasional chaotic Saturday spent doing everything and nothing. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Jessica tried reaching out a few times. Calls here, emails there. At first, it was pleading, "Let's talk. I'm sorry. I made a mistake." But as the months went by and I didn't respond, the tone shifted. Her words became sharp, angry, laced with desperation. It was clear she was unraveling. And honestly, I didn't care. She burned the bridge. I made sure she couldn't rebuild it. One day, while sorting through old boxes in the garage, I came across our wedding album. I hesitated, holding the heavy leather-bound book in my hands. The memories it held used to feel sacred, but now they felt hollow, tainted by the lies that had poisoned everything. Flipping through the pages, I stopped at one photo. Jessica smiling at me, her eyes full of something I once believed was love. Now all I saw was deceit. I thought about burning the album, watching it turn to ash. But then I realized something. I didn't need to destroy it. It no longer had power over me. So I closed the book, tossed it back into the box, and moved on. The real closure came a few weeks later. I was at a local park with the kids, throwing a football around with my son while my daughter played on the swings. It was a sunny day, The kind that feels like a reset button on life. "Dad!" my son shouted, his face lit with excitement as he caught a particularly tough throw. "Think I can try out for the football team next year?" "Absolutely," I said, grinning. In that moment, I realized I was free, not just from Jessica or the pain she caused, but from the weight of trying to hold on to something that had never been real. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was just a man who had survived, who had fought back, and who had won. Months later, I heard through the grapevine that Jessica had moved in with her sister in a different state, scraping by with odd jobs. Her boyfriend, the man who claimed to be my kid's real dad, had disappeared entirely, likely hiding from the wreckage of his exposed life. It was poetic justice. The two of them, once so confident, so smug, now reduced to nothing but whispers of their own mistakes. As for me, I started dating again, slowly, carefully. It wasn't about replacing Jessica. It was about rediscovering what it felt like to be with someone who saw me, respected me, and wanted to build something real. One night, as I tucked my son into bed, he looked at me with an expression that caught me off guard, serious, thoughtful. "Dad," he said, his voice small, "you're my real dad. I don't care what anyone else says." It hit me like a punch to the chest, but in the best way. I leaned down, brushing his hair back. "And you're my son. Always." That was the moment I knew I'd won. Not just the battles, but the war. Jessica and her lies were behind me. My kids and I were moving forward, stronger than ever. And as I turned off the light and closed his door, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace.